Imagine standing at your wife's grave, clutching a single white rose, when suddenly a little girl appears out of nowhere, her face streaked with tears. She looks at you straight into your soul and whispers one word that shatters everything you thought you knew. Daddy. In that moment, time stops. The grief you thought you had mastered explodes into confusion, terror, and a desperate need for answers. Who is this child? Why does she know your wife's secret nickname? And why does a stranger in the shadows seem so determined to take her away? Behind polished smiles and forged papers lies a hidden empire built on stolen children. Tonight, one man's quest for truth will unravel a conspiracy so dark it could destroy him or save the only piece of his wife that still lives. Subscribe now to Silent Lies, because the truth cannot stay buried forever. The cemetery was nearly empty that afternoon, the kind of stillness that makes every breath sound too loud, too heavy. Clouds pressed low against the December sky, and a cold wind slithered between bare branches, rattling them like brittle bones. Alexander West stood alone in front of the granite headstone, his tailored coat flaring slightly with each gust. In his gloved hand, he held a single white rose, the last ritual he had left for Megan. Her name was etched in stone: Megan West, beloved wife, 1985 to 2020. A sentence beneath it carved deeper than the dates. Love remains even when we don't. He knelt down slowly, brushing pine needles from the base of the stone, as if keeping her name clean still mattered, as if order could disguise the chaos in his heart. It had been 3 years. 3 years since her laughter had fallen silent. 3 years since his world had collapsed. He had built an empire, conquered rivals in boardrooms, and commanded respect across continents. But grief? Grief was the one thing he could not negotiate, could not buy, could not outmaneuver. It lived in him like an unwelcome tenant, unrelenting and cold. And then a sound. Fragile. Too fragile for a place so hushed. A muffled sob. Alex turned his head slightly, heart stalling in his chest. Beyond the headstone, where the land dipped toward a weathered bench, he saw her. A child. Small, fragile, maybe 6 years old. Blonde hair tangled and falling into her face, a coat far too big for her tiny frame. She clutched a worn, stuffed fox to her chest, its fur thinned from love, its ears bent permanently sideways. Her shoes were soaked, her cheeks raw from the cold. Alex's instincts shifted instantly, the CEO vanishing, the grieving widower sharpening. He stepped closer, voice careful, almost gentle. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, glassy with tears. She did not flinch at his presence. Instead, her lips parted, and one word slipped into the air, fragile yet devastating. "Daddy." Alex froze. Not a metaphorical freeze, not a hesitation. His entire body locked as if struck by lightning. His breath snagged, his heart constricted, the rose trembled in his fingers. "What did you say?" His voice cracked, raw, unsteady. The girl hugged the fox tighter. "Daddy," she whispered again, softer this time, with the certainty of a truth she had always known. "She said you'd come find me." The ground seemed to tilt beneath him. His legs weakened, and he dropped to one knee, eye level with the child, unable to comprehend the words clawing at his mind. "What's your name?" he asked, though fear made his throat tighten. She blinked. "Mia." His pulse pounded, his chest ached. He forced another question past the lump in his throat. "And your mother?" Her small arms squeezed the stuffed fox as though the toy might protect her from the weight of what she was about to say. "Meg." But she said not to say it too loud. He doesn't like it. Alex's blood turned to ice. Meg, not Megan. Only Hen, her closest college friend, had ever called her that. The nickname was private, intimate, a secret word from another lifetime. Hearing it now from the lips of this trembling child felt like a ghost had risen to speak. Before Alex could push further, a new voice sliced through the cemetery, polished and sharp. "There you are." A man strode toward them, tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal coat and leather gloves. His shoes crunched on frostbitten grass, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the gray light. His smile was polite, practiced, but cold in the eyes. "I'm so sorry," the man said smoothly, nodding toward Alex. "She tends to wander. Part of her grief process. I'm her foster guardian." Mia shrank behind the gravestone, clutching her fox. Alex's chest tightened. He rose slowly, shoulders squared. "She was here alone," he said quietly, measuring each word. "Yes, well," the man replied with a thin chuckle. She sneaks out during group therapy. Clever little one, knows how to hide. His tone was light, but something in it made Alex bristle, as if every syllable was too smooth, too polished. The man extended his hand toward Mia. Come now, Mia. She didn't move. Her wide eyes flicked between Alex and the man, silent pleading shimmering in them. They were Megan's eyes. She would have recognized them anywhere. Vulnerable, unshielded, desperate for help. Alex took a step forward. She said her mother's name was Meg. For the briefest second, the man faltered. Just a flicker. A pause in his perfect composure. Then his mask slid back into place. She must mean Maggie. Margaret. We had a resident by that name, he said quickly. Poor thing slipped through the cracks. Mia hugged the fox closer. She did not confirm his story. She did not look at him. She only stared at Alex, lips parting once more. She said you'd come find me. The man's grip tightened around her small arm. Thank you for keeping an eye on her, Mr. West. The use of his name made Alex's stomach twist. How did this man know who he was? Mia glanced back over her shoulder, her voice barely audible, fragile as breath. She said you'd come find me. And then they were gone, walking down the path between graves until the fog swallowed them whole. Alex remained rooted in place, breath shallow, heart hammering. Around him, the cemetery was unchanged. Still, but his world had tilted irreversibly. Megan was gone, but her secrets were not. And now, one small girl had ripped them wide open. That night, Alex sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the glittering skyline of Seattle. City lights blinked like static beyond the glass walls. His espresso machine hummed idly, untouched. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the marble counter beside an unopened laptop filled with quarterly projections. None of it mattered. None of it existed in the same universe as the memory replaying endlessly in his mind. The little girl's face, her trembling voice, that impossible name, Meg. And then the word that broke him, Daddy. Alex did not sleep. The city murmured below his window like a restless sea, neon washed across the glass, and the clock hands dragged through the dark as if time itself resisted morning. He sat on the edge of his sofa with his coat still on and the room key digging into his palm, replaying one impossible word until it scraped his nerves raw. Daddy. It echoed down empty hallways in his memory and chased him through dreams that refused to come. By daybreak, he was already driving, cutting across wet streets toward the cemetery. Each traffic light felt like an accusation, every red glow a demand for answers he did not have. The ground at Fairview Memorial Park was roughened by frost, the air sharp enough to sting. Megan's stone waited in its patient silence. The white rose now dusted with crystals that made it look too beautiful for sorrow. He stood there with his hands deep in his pockets, waiting for something to appear. Logic. Clarity. The past. Footsteps approached behind him, slow and uneven. He turned to see a man in a heavy coat, leaning on a wooden cane, beard gray as frost on bark. The groundskeeper's eyes were steady and kind in the way of people who have spent years watching others unravel and put themselves back together near graves. You met the little one, did you not? The man asked, voice low as if he feared disturbing the dead. She comes on Sundays, sometimes more. Same coat. Same toy fox, quiet as a prayer. Alex felt the cold press deeper into his bones. She said the name, he murmured. Meg. The groundskeeper nodded, gaze flicking to the headstone and back. She placed her hand right here, over your wife's name, like she was trying to feel a heartbeat through the stone. He reached into his coat. She left something. The item was not paper at first glance, but time had thinned it to the texture of an old letter. Alex took the photograph carefully. Color faded at the edges. A hospital room in gentle light. Megan sat propped against white pillows, hair tied back, eyes tired and luminous. In her arms lay a newborn swaddled in white, a tiny face turned toward her as if listening. Breath left Alex in a sound that was not quite a word. He turned the photograph over with hands that had steadied million-dollar pens and IPO signatures without a tremor. Blue ink on the back spelled out a world that should not exist. St. Jude Medical, Portland. March 4, 2019. Mia Megan West. His knees went weak. He sat on the edge of the granite base because the ground looked too far away. Megan had told him she was at a retreat the week of that date. He remembered the postcard, a sketch of pine trees and a lake, the way her handwriting broadened on the word quiet. He remembered tossing it into a drawer like a memento that meant nothing. The detail cut deeper than any accusation. Is this real? he asked without looking up. The groundskeeper's voice had no judgment in it, only the weight of long observation. I have seen grief twist people, Mr. West. I have seen it make lies look like kindness. But that child is not confused. She is grieving, and grief knows names. The wind shifted and carried the scent of damp earth and something sweet, a floral arrangement left on another stone. Alex pressed his thumb against the photo as if he needed to anchor it to his skin. She called me Daddy, he said, and the words sounded both fragile and enormous. Maybe there is more to your story than you think, the groundskeeper replied. Alex drove to Portland because there was nothing else left to do. He took a room 2 blocks from St. Jude Medical and stared at the pattern in the carpet until the memory of Megan's face in that photo forced him to move. He shaved. He changed. He left his watch on the nightstand. He traded the appearance of a man who could summon a board in 15 minutes for the posture of a man who wanted to be invisible. In the lobby of St. Jude, the green paint looked the color of cautions not obeyed. He chose a name he could say without flinching and a job title generic enough to slip past questions. The receptionist's fingers paused above the keyboard when he recited Megan's birth date. Her eyes lifted in a searching way that made his pulse leap. He felt the building breathe around him, the crisp antiseptic smell stirred by distant footsteps. A voice spoke behind him. You are not the first to ask about her. The woman in scrubs had the softened focus of someone who had watched too many miracles and too many losses to be startled by either. Dr. Daniels, the badge read. She guided him to a small office crowded with file boxes and a plant that had survived by sheer stubbornness. I remember her, the doctor said. She came alone. She gave birth to a little girl. She would not list a father. She wanted to keep the child off someone's radar. Who? Alex asked, though the answer lived somewhere behind his ribs already, a shadow that had learned to speak. She called him HC. She did not say more. She asked for a list of shelters that maintained discretion. She chose Bright Horizons. The doctor studied him with clinical compassion. The baby had your eyes. I try not to say things like that, but I am saying it now. The chair under Alex felt unsteady. He clasped his hands together to stop them from giving him away. He had told himself 100 stories about why Megan had grown distant in those final months. Professional stress, medical grief, the barren ache of trying to start a family and failing. None of those stories included a baby or a hidden path that bent around him. He spent that night in a hotel room that smelled faintly of wet pavement and dust. The bedside lamp turned the birth photograph into a relic under glass. He traced the edge of the image and asked a question that rattled the quiet of the room. Why did you not tell me? The answer did not come, but a different answer did, in the pragmatic voice that had guided him through acquisitions and disasters. If she hid, she was afraid of someone. If she named you on paper, she trusted you to finish what she started. He searched for Bright Horizons and found a website that wore good intentions like soft armor, stock photos, pastel fonts, mission statements that could belong to any charity gala. He scrolled past testimonials and donation tiers and then stopped. The executive director's name hit him like a glass sliding off a counter and shattering. Harold Cray, wire-rimmed glasses, polished smile. The stranger who had collected Mia at the grave as if she were a package arriving on schedule. Alex went to the facility the next morning. He wore a navy sweater that promised nothing and jeans that made him invisible. He kept his eyes level and friendly, practiced the posture of a man who wanted to give money and not disturb the balance of things. He shook the hand he wanted to break. He let Cray walk him down quiet hallways where the hush felt manufactured, like a stage set between takes. Children colored in designated corners. No laughter rose, only the scritch of crayons against paper. Through a pane of glass, he saw her again. Mia sat at a small table in a yellow jumper, the stuffed fox beside her like a sentinel. She drew steadily, head bowed. He asked one question in a tone meant to sound casual. No father listed? Cray waved it away with a phrase about missing records and confidentiality. In the main office, a file cabinet yielded a single-page document with a signature that wore Megan's name like a mask. Clean lines, careful pressure. The date sat on the page like a threat. 3 weeks before Megan died. There was a particular anger that did not raise the voice or clench the jaw. It sank quietly to the bottom of the person and hardened there into resolve. Alex thanked Cray. He praised the program. He walked back into air that smelled like rain and asphalt and let grief become fuel. In a rented room that night, he lay the forged guardianship in his mind and compared it to the way Megan had written notes on sticky paper, the way the loops of her letters leaned slightly to the right when she was excited. He sent scans to Clara. Her response came back quick and precise. The signatures do not match. If the doc is fake, guardianship is invalid. Move. Alex went to the facility again, not as a donor, not as a CEO, not as a man with a suit and a smile. He circled the building at dusk and mapped the way cameras panned. He found the service gate with a lock designed by someone who believed in shortcuts. He memorized the rhythm of footsteps on the overnight shift. He approached because nothing else would do. Inside, the corridor air was warm and stale, the kind found in places that pretend they do not hide anything. He moved like a person who had once written code to beat systems and now believed in beating them for a reason. The records room keypad gave up its secret under his fingertips' search for smudges. Inside the drawers, lives reduced to headings and stamps told a story no website could. A fabricated psychiatric report that smeared Megan as unstable. A child assessment that read like a template for stealing trust. At the very back, a placement sheet that named countries like destinations on a travel brochure and hid a machine for exporting children inside a word that sounded like charity. He photographed everything until the room shifted, until light under the door moved. He slipped sideways into a storage closet and let his heartbeat count the distance of danger. The handle tested, then moved on. He left the way he came, down the silent corridor, out to the cold air that felt like permission. Later, in the glow of his screen, he sent the images to 3 places at once. Clara, the journalist whose work had cut the legs from worse lies than this, an official channel that took tips and did not laugh at unthinkable truths. He stared at the photo of Megan and Mia on his phone until the pixels blurred. Then he whispered a promise he had never imagined saying out loud, "I am coming for you." Outside, rain began to fall, sharp and thin. Each drop struck the window like a clock restarting. Inside, Alex felt the unfamiliar steadiness of a man who had finally stepped into the center of his story. Alex returned to the facility that afternoon without the armor of a suit. A plain hoodie, a nondescript cap, the kind of face the world overlooks. He parked in the back lot where the asphalt turned to a strip of frost-burned grass and walked the perimeter slowly, memorizing distances, angles, the blind spots between cameras. He told himself he was not here to act, only to see. But seeing has a way of becoming decision when the person you love is on the other side of the glass. Through a narrow window of the east wing, he found her. Mia sat on a rubber mat with a small box of crayons arranged like a tiny skyline. She was drawing a house with no windows, a roof too steep for rain, a single door with no handle. The stuffed fox lay beside her, ears rubbed to felt, tail thinned by so many grips that it looked like a ribbon. Her shoulders rose and fell with a child's slow concentration, but the rest of her was too still, as if she had learned to make herself smaller than trouble. He did not tap the glass. He did not wave. He stood there and let her lift her gaze. When her eyes found him, there was no shock, no sudden smile. There was recognition that moved like a tide coming in. She did not look away. Neither did he. A voice approached from behind him, level and smooth. "Mr. West." Alex turned. Harold Cray stood with his hands in his coat pockets, wire-rimmed glasses catching the dull light, expression composed. "I had a feeling you would be back," he said. Alex kept his voice low. "She is my daughter." Cray's mouth tightened by a fraction, the smallest admission of pressure. "That is a bold claim, Mr. West. You do not have custody." He let the last word hang between them like the edge of a blade. "I have a photograph. I have timelines that match. I have Megan's real signature, and I know a forgery when I see one," Alex said. He did not step closer, but the air did. Cray stepped instead, tone clipped and faintly amused. "You think a handful of soft memories and a sudden change of heart grant you authority. You walked out on her path, and now that it suits you, you walk back in." He gave a small, sympathetic shrug. "This facility protects children from chaos." Alex felt the anger that does not raise the voice. It gathered behind his ribs and steadied his breath. "This is not about what suits me. It is about truth. Megan would never have chosen you." Cray's smile thinned. "She is not here to speak, is she?" A staffer appeared at a door down the corridor and called his name. "Board meeting, sir." Cray offered a final, immaculate nod and turned away. Alex watched him go and memorized the rhythm of his footfalls. He left the property without looking back. At the hotel he could not eat, could not sit. He stood in the shadowed room with the city humming beyond the glass and felt the shape of a choice closing around him like a doorway. The knock came after midnight. Not loud, just decisive. He opened the door to an empty hall and an envelope on the floor, unmarked. He broke the seal with hands that did not tremble and slid out a single document printed on heavy paper. A birth certificate. He read it once, then again, then pressed his palm against the text as if heat could fuse it to bone. Name of child, Maya Megan West. Date of birth, March 4, 2019. Mother, Megan Elaine West. Father, Alexander James West. He sank to the carpet and sat there with the page against his chest, breathing as if learning how to do it again. Megan had written his name where it could not be erased. She had carried fear like a shield and still drawn a line back to him. He thought of the postcard from the supposed writer's retreat, of the wide word quiet, and understood that she had been protecting something louder than any admission, their daughter. When he stood, the uncertainty was gone. He scanned the certificate and sent it to Clara and to his inner legal circle with a single instruction. Begin. He tucked the original into the inside pocket of his coat, above his heart like a relic, and drove east before the sky could decide what kind of day it wanted to be. Route 84 unfurled ahead, a corridor of gray and white. He drove without a convoy, without the reassuring choreography of assistance, and found the separateness bracing. The world narrowed to the hum of tires and the pulse of the page against his ribs. Somewhere after the signs turned sparse and the trees gathered closer, a memory rose that he had kept half-buried. A night 3 years earlier, rain corrugating the windows, a red folder on the kitchen table filled with clinic forms and percentages that felt like verdicts. He had said something practical and small about odds. Megan had looked at him for a long time and asked a question that did not fit the conversation. What if I am not chasing it for us anymore? He had not known how to follow her into that sentence. He had let it end there. The car's heater pushed dry air across his face. He understood now what she had been saying and what he had failed to hear. He did not go back to bright horizons. A transfer facility sat on a quiet street beneath a modest sign that called itself Glen Hill Residential Care. The building looked like a renovated convent with a single camera under the even windows built to suggest warmth without revealing much. Through the glass near the common room he saw her again, legs tucked beneath her, coloring at a round table. The fox lay at her elbow like a guardian that had learned to wait. Alex did not move. In the mirrored office beyond the playroom he saw another figure watching. Cray stood in the reflection, still as a photograph, as if he owned the air between observers and observed. Alex left before the minute could break. He drove to a diner where the coffee came in thick white mugs, and the waitress refilled without asking. In the back booth he opened a small envelope he had found wedged into a slit of a hallway window at the facility earlier that day, tucked behind a drooping curtain. Inside was the crayon drawing of a house with no windows. On the back, in block letters pressed into the paper with the effort of fear, "Help me. He says if I run again, I disappear." The coffee cooled untouched. He folded the note and placed it with the birth certificate. Then he took out his phone and sent a message to a number that answered to truth when truth was inconvenient. Isa Monroe. He wrote, "I have a story about children who vanish on paper and one girl who will not. I will show you everything." The night that followed had no sirens, no distant arguments, only wind in the trees and the measured steps of 2 guards whose rotations he had timed the night before. He waited behind a line of hedges that held their leaves like a wall. The cold got into his hands first and then into his knees, but he did not shift. He had drawn maps in his mind, not of corridors but of contingencies, of what happens when a quiet rescue becomes a public war. He moved when the clock clicked past 2 and a door at the rear exhaled its warm breath as a sleepy guard stepped outside to smoke. Alex crossed the gap to the administration wing and let the padlock at the service gate surrender to a wire tool that spoke the old language of pressure and patience. Inside, the hallway smelled of disinfectant and old paper. Cameras panned with a predictability that had nothing to do with vigilance. He timed his steps to the sweep and slid his shoulder along the wall until he reached the door with the keypad that wore 4 numbers shinier than the rest. He had done this once already in another building. He was not here to repeat himself. He was here to confirm the thing he already knew, that the machine was larger than one file, that the story must not depend on a single set of documents or a single leak. In the records room, drawers whispered open. Sister files, parallel names, infants and adolescents with guardianships that circled back to the same signatures that did not belong to the same hands, placement destinations that sounded humanitarian and read like export routes. He did not linger over rage. He photographed. He organized. He backed up twice. A sound at the door made the air inside his lungs go still. Light broadened at the threshold and slid across the floor like a blade. He stepped into a storage closet that smelled of cardboard and toner, counted 30, then 10 more for caution, and came out to a corridor that had recovered its silence. He left the way he came, through a service yard that hid a small herb garden under frost, over the gate that marked the edge between pretense and street. Back in the car, he uploaded the images to multiple encrypted destinations. He sent a link to Clara with a lawyer's summary he could have given in a boardroom, except this time the balance sheet held only one line item, a child. He sent a vault key to Isa and added a time-stamped note. Not rumor, not hearsay, evidence. He opened an official channel for tips that did not ask for names and did not lose them. Send forensics, he wrote. Follow the money, freeze the exits. He watched the first files complete their transfer and felt, for the first time in days, the particular calm that had visited him at the peak of hard negotiations when the path through chaos finally came into view. He thought of Megan under hospital light, a newborn in her arms. He thought of the little girl drawing a door without a handle. He thought of what a door becomes when someone on the other side chooses to open it. He set the phone down, leaned his head back against the seat, and whispered into the cold interior. Mia, I am here. I will not let them write you into the margins. Outside, the hedges rattled. Far away, a truck downshifted. The night closed in around him, not like a trap, but like a theater moments before the curtain rises. The morning broke without color, a pale strip of light pressed against a sky that had forgotten how to be blue. Alex watched the upload bars reach completion, a procession of green that felt like a fuse burning toward impact. Evidence lived now in 3 places he could not touch, and in one pocket over his heart. He closed the laptop and listened to the quiet. The city seemed to be holding its breath. By noon, the silence cracked. His phone began to vibrate, first with the dry hum of a single alert, then with a cascade. Headlines stacked themselves one atop another until they blurred into a single sentence. Orphans for export. Photos he had taken under the dim fluorescence of bright horizons were suddenly everywhere. Banners and thumbnails and full-bleed images that forced anyone looking to face the forged signatures and the false seals. The article did not posture. It told. It placed names next to deeds, dates next to lies, destinations next to children who had not consented to be shipped like merchandise. It was Isa's voice, measured and scalpel sharp, turning secrecy into testimony. Calls came from numbers he recognized and numbers he did not. Clara first, her tone steady with the momentum of a case that had found its spine. We will move filings today. Temporary restraining orders, preservation of records, a petition to invalidate guardianship pending review. He listened, gave brief answers, felt the machine of the law whir to life on his behalf and on behalf of a child who drew doors without handles. Agencies stirred. A state investigator left a message that sounded official and careful, as if trying to speak while the ground shifted. Reporters wanted quotes. He gave none. He did not want to become the story. He wanted the papers in those drawers and the faces behind those signatures to become the story, and then he wanted them to become consequences. Bright Horizons issued a statement by early afternoon. It read like a well-rehearsed apology to a party no one attended, regret without admission, concern without detail. They accused unnamed bad actors of manufacturing evidence. They called the reports harmful to vulnerable populations. They used words that had been polished by years of laundering accountability. The response pleased no one and satisfied less. At the edge of this noise, a single thought continued to beat in Alex like a second pulse. Where is Mia? He had seen her through glass. He had watched Cray watching her. The exposure would make the facility change its posture. They would not be careless now. They would tighten. They would hide. He went home to Seattle not because he believed he would be safer there, but because he had finally understood what a home was supposed to be. A place where someone could knock and be received. A place where a child could fall asleep without checking the corners 3 times. He moved through the rooms that had once looked like manifestos of success and saw only the spaces where a small life could grow. A nightlight for a fox-shaped shadow. A shelf for drawings that evidence could not turn into exhibits. The doorbell rang as evening drew its gray shades across the windows. It rang once, a ring too small to belong to a courier or a neighbor. Alex approached the door with caution that felt like an instinct learned in another life. He looked through the viewer and saw nothing but the empty wash of hallway light. He opened the door. Mia stood at the threshold, rain-soaked, hair darkened to gold brown by water, her pink socks turning darker with each drop that ran off her shoes and onto the marble. She clutched the fox to her chest, its fur wet and flattened. Her mouth opened, and a sentence stepped out, small and shaking. He said if I ever ran again, you would know what to do. Her knees softened. Alex moved before physics could claim her, catching her with the ease of a promise he had already made. He closed the door with his foot and held her, feeling heat through the wet coat, feeling her heartbeat keep time with his. He spoke to her as someone would speak to a skittish animal who has finally made it to safety. You are safe. You are home. No one will take you from me. She clung without words, a grip that answered every question. He wrapped her in towels warmed by the dryer and made tea that she did not drink but refused to let out of her hand. He put the fox into the dryer and told her that steam was a kind of magic, the kind that turns cold back into comfort. She watched the dryer window with grave attention, as if the world could still change its mind and take small things away. When the dryer beeped, he placed the fox into her arms. She exhaled and fell asleep on the couch, the machine sound of rain on the windows pulling her deeper. He did not sleep. He sat in a chair across from her and watched the rise and fall of her breath. Every plan that had felt precise now felt like a scaffolding for something more human and more complicated. He texted Clara without preamble. She is with me. He anticipated the legal storm the sentence would bring and welcomed it. The reply came in seconds. We file for emergency custody in the morning. Be ready. Morning came with the cold light of courtrooms, marble floors, brass plates, a hallway that amplified footsteps and turned them into metronomes for anxiety. Alex wore a suit because there are rituals even truth respects. He sat beside Clara, his hands clasped, and looked at the door where the path into the room became a threshold between silence and decision. Cray arrived in a suit that had become a costume. He was flanked by two attorneys whose expressions suggested they believed the world could be argued back into shape. A publicist hovered, ready to interpret if the law failed to. Cameras winked outside the glass like small, curious birds. The judge entered with the economy of someone who refused poetry. She set the tone in a single sentence that cut clean through the tension. Let us deal with facts, not fear. Opening statements built frames around those facts. Cray's attorney described Alex as a wealthy absentee who had stepped into a narrative because conscience likes an audience. He had not been present. The attorney pressed. He could not simply claim a role because biology found him inconveniently late. Clara rose without flourish. My client is not auditioning for virtue, she said. He is asserting a legal truth backed by a document signed at birth and corroborated by witness testimony and forensic analysis. He did not arrive late. He was kept away. The evidence moved like stones laid across water. The forged power of attorney with a signature that mirrored Megan's without becoming it. The metadata from body camera footage that placed a hidden drawer in the administrative wing where no such drawer was declared in compliance logs. A handwriting expert whose voice did not waver while she explained loops and pressure and angles until the forgery became less a suspicion than a geometry problem with only one possible answer. Isa took the stand and spoke in the flat cadence of a person who cannot afford to dramatize the truth. She described corridors arranged to reduce sound. She named countries. She explained how charitable language can be draped over a machinery designed to move children like inventory. No one who hides a child on paper can be trusted with that child in person, she said, and the sentence landed with the weight of something the room had already learned to believe. Then Dr. Carol Daniels stepped forward and carried into the room the one thing no database could supply: memory. She recounted the birth, the quiet courage of a woman who held a newborn and refused to name a father on a form because fear can travel farther than a signature. She looked at Alex without accusation and said the thing that unspooled the last knot. She named him on the birth certificate anyway. She said the child deserved to know that she was wanted. The judge called a recess. The air in the hallway outside the courtroom felt thinner. Alex stepped into a small conference room where Mia sat cross-legged at a table, coloring. The fox was dry now and sat upright next to the cup of crayons like a second witness. Mia looked up. Are we leaving again? Not yet, he said. But soon. She went back to her drawing. A sun, a lake. A man with unruly hair holding hands with a girl in a yellow dress. At Mommy's house, she whispered, and did not look up. He studied the drawing and felt something inside him shift, slide into alignment like a spine corrected. When the hearing resumed, the room contained less air and more decision. The judge reviewed the filings with a patience that read as control. She asked 3 questions that cut to the middle of things and accepted 3 answers that did not flinch. Her ruling was not dramatic. It was thorough. Emergency custody to the biological father pending final proceedings. Immediate suspension of Bright Horizons intake and transfers. A directive for the state to secure all records and begin a comprehensive audit of guardianship authorizations. A sound rose around them, a contained exhale from a dozen throats. Cray stared forward, with the focus of a man calculating the angle of a next move. Reporters shifted. 2 officers moved to the back of the room with professional attention. Clara placed a hand on Alex's arm, the kind of brief touch that signals conclusion without celebration. "You did not win," she said quietly. "You did the necessary part. We finished the rest." That night, Alex turned a key in a lock that did not feel like an entry so much as a return. He had stopped answering work after 5, stopped permitting headlines at breakfast, started learning the shapes of a new life measured in small decisions. He carried Mia to the guest room he had already begun to remake. He had painted the walls sky blue. He had hung paper stars that spun slowly in the current of a vent. He had placed a fox-shaped nightlight on the dresser and watched it bloom into a soft amber planet when he switched it on. Mia stood in the doorway and looked at the room the way a person looks at a horizon that might be truthful. He crouched to her height. "Do you want to pick where the stars go?" She nodded with ceremony and lifted one, then another, pressing tacky edges to the ceiling with careful fingers. He watched her arrange a sky. Later, they sat on the floor and folded laundry into imperfect stacks. She held up a single pink sock, turned it over, and asked without drama, "Are you going to leave too?" Alex drew her back against his chest and answered with a certainty that did not need volume. "No, not in this lifetime, sweetheart." She let out a breath that contained a history. She leaned into him the way children do when they believe a promise has become architecture. The world outside continued to boil, to demand statements and meetings and plans. The investigation widened. Lives that had been pressed into files began to lift their faces. But inside the small house that had been too clean for grief and now felt right for living, Alex placed the birth certificate in a frame in his study and looked at the photo beside it. Megan laughing in a sunlit field, hair tossed by wind. He did not speak to the picture. He did not need to. The home itself answered. The first morning after the ruling arrived like a quiet guest, polite and almost hesitant. Spring had slipped into the city without announcement, leaving a trace of green along the sidewalks and a mild breeze that stirred the curtains. Alex woke before dawn, not to an alarm or a calendar notification, but to the soft weight of responsibility settled where his ambition used to live. In the next room, a fox-shaped nightlight glowed dimly, casting a small orange planet against the wall. Mia slept on her side with one hand outstretched, palm open, as if even in dreams she was ready to hold on if something tried to leave. He stood in the doorway and let the stillness teach him. For years his mornings had belonged to markets and meetings, to the choreography of efficiency. Now they belonged to a pair of tiny socks, a hairbrush with a pink ribbon threaded through its spine, and a refrigerator door that would soon hold art instead of investor memos. He went to the kitchen and learned the simple arithmetic of waffles and strawberries. He cut the berries into imperfect hearts and stacked them carefully, the way he had once stacked arguments during a negotiation. When Mia patted in, hair ruffled, fox held by one leg, she stared at the plate as if it might disappear. He slid it toward her and said nothing. She took one bite, considered, then nodded once, solemn as a judge. They made a life in increments. He practiced braiding her hair in the mirror. His fingers clumsy at first, too tight, then too loose, until the pattern held without hurting. He wrote short notes on napkins and tucked them into her lunch. "You can do this. I am with you. Waffles tonight." He learned to tell the difference between silence that meant worry and silence that meant peace. After 5 in the afternoon, his phone went into a drawer. Headlines no longer belonged at breakfast. On a Saturday that smelled like rain and pine, he unlocked the door of a lake house that had waited too long with its windows closed. The West family cabin had been a ghost in his paperwork for years, a place Megan had loved and he had neglected because grief had taught him to turn away from anything that could not be monetized. Now he stepped inside and breathed. Dust floated in diagonal light. The floors remembered the sound of laughter. Somewhere in the house, a lavender sachet hid among linens and released a scent that folded time. They worked like people repairing a ship at sea. He sanded the porch railing until the wood came back to itself, and the grain looked like topographical lines on a map to somewhere kinder. He replaced wind chimes and listened to their tentative song. He scrubbed surfaces as though he could remove more than dirt. Mia moved through rooms with the ceremony of someone meeting their own story. In the smallest bedroom, she discovered a box of paper stars that Megan had once hung for holidays. She held one up by its silver string and asked without looking at him, "Can they stay?" He said yes before the air could carry her doubt anywhere. Afternoons stretched into something that resembled freedom. On the dock they sat with bare feet dipping into lake water cold enough to make them hiss. He taught her how to skip stones. She taught him how to fail at skipping stones and laugh anyway. He learned that when she laughed from the belly, her shoulders released. And when her shoulders released, she would sometimes reach for his sleeve without noticing, as if reassuring herself that the world had not shifted underfoot. One evening, as sun poured gold over the water and the wind smelled like damp bark, Mia pulled a folded paper from her backpack. "I made something," she said, and offered it with both hands. He opened the drawing and saw 3 stick figures beneath a round yellow sun. A tall man in blue with a crooked line for hair, a small girl with a crown of flowers, and a woman in a green dress dotted with stars. Above them, written slowly in purple crayon, "Mommy, me, Daddy." His throat tightened too fast for words. The paper shook once before he steadied it. "I know she is not here," Mia whispered, eyes on the water. "But I think maybe she can still see us." He drew her against his side and nodded, because speech felt like too rough a tool for a moment this fine. "I think so too." They drove to Fairview Memorial Park with wildflowers she had collected herself on the roadside, stems uneven, colors unplanned. She skipped down the stone path and knelt at Megan's grave. She tucked the flowers into the vase and pressed her palm over Megan's name, the same place she had touched before she knew where home was. "We brought her home," she said, not loudly, not for an audience. Alex stood with his hands in his pockets and watched the sky above the birch branches. He did not craft a speech. He said a single sentence to the air. "I hope you are proud. She is everything good you ever were." The refrigerator at home became a museum of victories. A crooked clay fox from art class, a reading chart, drawings of doors with handles now, windows with curtains drawn back. In the hallway, tiny shoes lined up in a row created a new geometry. In the evenings, the house collected the soft sounds of living. Running water, a page turning, the thud of a book falling when someone fell asleep before finishing the chapter. Not every night was easy. Fear returned sometimes with its old habits, dressed as dreams that had no words. Mia would wake damp and pale, eyes wide without focus. He learned not to interrogate nightmares. He learned to sit on the edge of the bed and hold her hand and say the same 3 sentences until her breath slowed. "I am here. You are safe. Go back to sleep, sunshine." The word sunshine came to him uninvited, like something Megan might have said, and he kept it because it felt like a bridge instead of a borrowed line. On Sundays they built a swing set in the backyard. The instructions were baffling, a map with no legend, but he refused to outsource the work. They laughed at lopsided progress and cheered when the first swing held. When Mia climbed on and pushed off, the creak of the chain made an honest sound, metal speaking to wood, effort speaking to reward. For the first time since the courthouse, Alex laughed without checking the edges of his happiness. The investigation did not pause because their home had found new rhythms. Clara sent updates that were both clinical and humane. Audits had begun. Transfers were frozen. Several documents that had once seemed authoritative were now judged to be elaborate counterfeits. State agencies moved with the deliberate caution of institutions that have learned to hide their fear behind procedure. ISA published follow-up pieces that placed faces next to policies and refused to let a scandal be treated like a story with only one chapter. Alex read enough to stay informed and know more. His first duty was the hand that reached for him at night and the pair of eyes that searched for him in a crowd and relaxed when they found him. They returned to the lake house each weekend until the place stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like an address. He taught Mia to feed birds with open palms, to leave room for small wings to panic and then trust. In the late light, they would sit on the porch and watch fireflies bloom out of grass as if the lawn had learned Morse code. She asked him a question one night while counting the lights aloud. "Do you think the stars are doors?" He looked down at her and wished for words worthy of the thought. "Doors," he repeated. "Maybe Mommy walks through them sometimes to check on us," she said, not timid, simply curious. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. If anyone could, it would be her. She nodded once, satisfied, and leaned against him as crickets tuned the dark. When they packed to drive back to the city, Mia placed 2 photos on the refrigerator side by side with magnets shaped like moons. In one, Megan laughed in a sunlit field, hair tossed by wind, eyes bright. In the other, Alex and Mia stood on the courthouse steps, his tie crooked, her front teeth missing, both of them smiling like balance had been restored. The house changed around the pictures. It stopped sounding like an empty shell that echoed footsteps and started sounding like a song with a bass line of small domestic noises, a kettle clicking, a dryer cooling, a pencil tracing stars on construction paper. Under that song, another promise held steady. He answered work only after morning drop-off. He turned down dinners that did not include a booster seat. At night, after the dishwasher had made its last mechanical sigh, he would stand in the doorway of Mia's room and listen to the quiet. He would remember the girl at the grave who had called him daddy like a fact, the man in the gray coat who had tried to turn a child into paperwork, the woman in the hospital who had written his name where erasures could not reach. He would whisper what had become both prayer and plan. I am here. I am not leaving. As spring deepened, the sky learned blue again. Trees unfurled green like flags of truce. On a Tuesday evening, when homework lay finished on the table and the Fox nightlight glowed softly from the dresser, Mia climbed into his lap with the confident gravity of a child who knows where she belongs. She looked up. Do you think we will ever forget? He shook his head. We will remember the right parts, he said. We will remember the lake, the swing, and the way stars look when they decide the night is not scary. She nodded, satisfied, and tucked her face under his chin. Outside, a breeze moved through the pines. Inside, a home, stitched from sorrow, second chances, and quiet courage, settled into itself. The days did not announce themselves with triumph. They arrived one by one, ordinary as mail, and Alex learned to greet them without bracing. Morning meant the scrape of a chair at the kitchen table, and the sound of a pencil testing its point against the margin of a worksheet. Mia liked to do the first problem in silence, and then glance up to check that he was still there. He was always within reach, sleeves rolled, coffee cooling, attention steady in a way that did not require speeches. He started measuring time in smaller ways, how long it took the Fox nightlight to warm from dark to amber, how long it took the dryer to soften a towel just right, how long a ponytail would stay neat before it turned into a weather report of the day. When he braided her hair unevenly, she would tilt her head and say, "Try again," and he would, more patient with strands of hair than he had ever been with a board's resistance. The investigation widened beyond their door, and he let it widen without pulling them into its center. Clara called with updates that sounded like deliberate footsteps on a metal stair. Audits, seized servers, interviews that connected signatures to bank routes and bank routes to flights that no one had been meant to notice. Isa's follow-ups refused to let the story slip into abstraction. She named children and placed policies beside their consequences and insisted that people look until it hurt. Alex read enough to understand the wave, but he kept his body turned toward the house he was teaching to be a harbor. There were setbacks that did not become crises because he was present for them. A night when Mia woke with a breath caught sideways, eyes open but seeing the wrong room. He did not ask for details she could not give. He sat on the edge of her bed and let her hold his forearm with both hands while he repeated the same 3 sentences, quietly enough to belong to the dark. I am here. You are safe. Go back to sleep, sunshine. The word belonged to them now, a bridge between a woman he loved and a child he was learning how to raise. On a weekday washed with thin rain, they went back to school together. The front steps were busy with the choreography of backpacks and permission slips and parents who tried not to show their nerves. Mia held his fingers the way a climber holds a rope, not out of terror but out of respect for the distance below. He met her teacher, a woman with the calm eyes of someone who has witnessed hundreds of children practice becoming themselves. They discussed routines and accommodations and quiet corners with beanbags. When Alex turned to leave, Mia hesitated. He crouched and pointed at the classroom door. Count to 20 with your eyes open, he said softly. Then look back. I will still be here, but you will not need me to be. She nodded, serious, and did as instructed. When she looked back, she did not have to search. At home, they built new rituals inside old spaces. Saturday mornings at the lake became instruction without pressure. He taught her how to listen for fish breaking the surface and how to throw bread to ducks without favor so that generosity did not become hierarchy. She taught him how to play a game she invented called Star Names, where you looked at a random scatter of nails in the porch boards and pretended they were constellations with secret meanings. She named one Megan's door and another the fox that waits. He did not correct her myth, he learned it. Fairview Memorial Park lost its rawness when they returned not as seekers but as a family reporting in. Mia knelt and pressed her palm to the stone the way she always had, but now her voice carried a different gravity. "We brought her home," she said again, as if the sentence itself maintained the world's alignment. Alex stood with his hands in his pockets and let the wind carry his answer. "I am doing what you asked, Meg." The words did not land on the ground like stones. They rose and disappeared, and that felt correct. The house changed in ways too ordinary for photographs. A pair of muddy sneakers learned to live on a mat by the door. The refrigerator gathered papers that plotted progress rather than crisis. On a shelf near the kitchen, a row of picture books leaned like eager witnesses. In the hallway, 2 coats hung side by side, one long and charcoal, one yellow and small and patched at the elbow where a snag had tried to become a tear. He found himself speaking to silence less, and to his daughter more. He asked questions that did not require the right answer. What did the wind smell like at recess? What color is your teacher's laugh? What do you think the clouds are trying to say? She answered with the authority of children who trust their thoughts. Like pencils, blue but sharp. They are telling the birds to be careful. He wrote her observations down in a notebook he kept like a ledger, not of money, but of days. In the evenings, he cooked badly until he cooked well. He learned that waffles could move off the breakfast menu and survive the translation. He learned that strawberries could be cut into hearts faster when you stopped trying to make them perfect. He learned that a kitchen towel on a small shoulder was a cape, and that capes by definition survived spaghetti sauce. When she declared herself a superhero named Second Chance, he saluted and asked for orders. "Protect the porch from invisible wolves," she said. He did as told for 20 minutes, utterly sincere. Sometimes the larger world intruded and asked for quotes and meetings and promises he did not owe. He declined politely. When the state scheduled a follow-up hearing to convert emergency custody into permanence, he prepared like a man who had failed at many things but not at this. He reviewed the files not to memorize them, but to remind himself that he would not let the case become a puzzle people admired and then set aside. In court, the judge wore the same economy of language and the same refusal to perform. Papers were reviewed and signatures matched and procedures marched past one by one until the ruling belonged to gravity rather than sentiment. Custody confirmed. Transfers shuttered. A directive to examine any organization that had built its reputation on words that could be bent to hide harm. They celebrated by not throwing a party. They celebrated by going to the lake and letting wind do what wind does to worry. On the dock, Mia swung her legs and watched ripples go out from her heels like messages she had not decided how to sign. She pulled a folded paper from her backpack again, a new drawing, crisp and certain. 3 figures under a yellow circle. The woman in green had stars in her hair, but this time the stars extended beyond her, scattered into the blue like breadcrumbs for travelers. Above the picture, a new sentence in purple crayon curved like a banner. She said you would come find me. He traced the curve with his eyes and answered as if speaking into a radio that crossed distances. I will always be coming for you. That night, they sat on the porch and watched fireflies blink as if the grass were trying to learn language. She leaned against him and looked up through the dark screen of pine branches. Do you think the stars are doors? She asked again, as if the question needed to be renewed like a promise. He drew her closer and considered the sky. If anyone could walk through them, it would be your mother, he said. Maybe she does not need doors. Maybe stars are just windows she leaves open. Mia nodded, satisfied by the answer she had helped create. He tucked her into bed beneath paper stars that turned slowly whenever the heat came on. She touched the fox's stitched ear, and then his wrist, and then the edge of the blanket, a 3-point check that had become a ceremony. Are you going to stay? She asked, not fearfully but as a craftsman might confirm a measurement. He rested his forehead briefly against hers. Yes. Not in this lifetime, sweetheart. Not in any story we tell. In the quiet after her breathing leveled, he walked through the house and turned off lights like punctuation at the end of sentences. In his study, 2 photographs stood side by side. In one, Megan laughed in a field where the wind had opinions. In the other, he and Mia stood on courthouse steps, his tie crooked, her front teeth shy by 2. Between them sat a frame with a paper no one would ever forge again. He did not touch the glass. He did not speak to the images. He let them do the speaking. On the porch, he stood in the dark and listened to the lake throw itself gently against the shore. There were things he had not repaired and things he never would. There were apologies that could not be delivered and gifts that would never arrive. But there was this, a house stitched from sorrow and second chances and the quiet courage of showing up again tomorrow. He closed his eyes and saw a small hand press against a headstone and a small mouth say a sentence that had changed the direction of his life. She said, "You would come find me." He opened his eyes to the night and answered in a voice that did not need to be loud to be true. "I always will. Grief is a language that never leaves you." For Alexander West, it began at a grave, where silence felt heavier than stone. But that silence was broken by the voice of a little girl who called him father, and with that single word, the story of his life was rewritten. He learned that love is not bound by secrets, that truth can be buried but never destroyed, and that even in the darkest places, hope waits for the brave to find it. Mia's journey was more than survival, it was a testament to resilience, to the unbreakable connection between parent and child, to the idea that even the most carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of truth. Against forged documents and powerful enemies, Alex chose not to be silent. He fought for his daughter and in doing so uncovered a network of shadows that thrived on stolen innocence. His battle was not just personal. It became universal for every child hidden behind closed doors, for every voice silenced by fear. Yet beyond the courtrooms, the headlines, and the investigations, the real victory was smaller, quieter. It lived in the sound of Mia's laughter echoing across the lake. It lived in the soft glow of a fox-shaped nightlight and the careful braids in a little girl's hair. It lived in promises, kept promises to never walk away again, to never let fear define their home, to always, always show up. This story is not only about exposing corruption or reclaiming a stolen child. It is about what we choose to protect when everything else is stripped away. It is about the courage to love when love costs everything, and the redemption that comes when we finally understand what it means to stay. So if this journey moved you, if it stirred something deep within your own story, then join us. Subscribe to Silent Lies. Here, we tell the stories the world tries to bury. Stories of secrets and betrayals, of courage and second chances. Stories that remind us that even in the quietest moments, the truth is never truly silent. Because sometimes, the lies scream the loudest. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice, yours, mine, ours, to break through the silence.